My parents treated me like a ghost for 15 years, but the moment the ink dried on the deed to the most expensive estate in Aspen, they suddenly materialized on my doorstep with luggage and a lawyer. It is truly fascinating how a $15 million mansion can instantly cure their selective amnesia and turn a forgotten daughter into their sudden retirement plan. My name is Amelia Breyer, and standing here against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the master suite, I finally felt like I existed. The glass was triple-paned and reinforced, designed to withstand the brutal winds that whipped through the Colorado Rockies. But if I pressed my palm against it, I could almost imagine the biting cold waiting on the other side. Below me, the world was disappearing. A massive blizzard was swallowing the valley, turning the jagged pines into ghostly white spikes and erasing the road that led up to my sanctuary. This was Silver Peak Summit, a place where the air was thin, the neighbors were invisible, and the silence cost $15 million. I took a sip of the vintage Pinot Noir I had been saving for this exact moment. The liquid was heavy and rich, grounding me while the snow swirled in chaotic patterns outside. $15 million. I said the number aloud to the empty room, letting the syllables roll off my tongue like a prayer. It was an obscene amount of money to spend on a house for one person, especially considering that less than a month ago, I was debating whether I could afford the organic eggs at the grocery store. But the Summit was not just a house, it was a fortress. It was a declaration of independence carved out of stone, steel, and glass. It was the furthest possible point from the cramped, moldy basement apartment in Queens where I had spent my 20s. My reflection in the dark glass stared back at me. I am 34 years old. I looked tired. Perhaps, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes after running a marathon and winning, not the exhaustion of running just to stay in place. For the last 15 years, Christmas has been a ritual of solitude and instant noodles. I could close my eyes and vividly recall the smell of that cheap, spicy beef flavoring that permeated my clothes and my hair. I used to sit on a secondhand futon that smelled of cat urine, even though I never owned a cat, and scroll through my phone. Torturing myself, the screen would light up with photos from the Breyer family vacation. One year it was Hawaii, with my mother, Linda, wearing a hibiscus flower behind her ear, holding a cocktail. The next year it was Paris, with my father, Robert, standing proudly in front of the Eiffel Tower. And always, front and center, was Julianne, my younger sister, the golden child. She would be beaming, tanned, and draped in designer clothes that cost more than my annual rent. They never called, not once. On Christmas morning, I would sometimes stare at my phone for hours, willing it to ring, bargaining with the universe for just a single text message that said, "Merry Christmas, Amelia." It never came. I was the ghost they had exorcised from their perfect life. I was the awkward, serious daughter who wanted to study biotechnology instead of marrying a rich dentist. I was the failure who refused to follow the script. But ghosts have a way of haunting back. 2 weeks ago, I signed the final papers with Ether Genetics. The acquisition of my biotech startup had been quiet, aggressive, and astronomically lucrative. I had developed a method for rapid gene sequencing that cut the processing time by 80%. The giants in the industry wanted it, and they paid a king's ransom to get it. When the wire transfer hit my account, I did not scream. I did not call anyone. I simply sat in my office chair and watched the numbers on the screen, feeling a strange, cold calm wash over me. I was a multimillionaire. I could buy Hawaii. I could buy the Eiffel Tower, or at least a very convincing replica, but I did not post a status update. I did not update my LinkedIn profile. I kept it buried, just like they had buried me. This Christmas was supposed to be my coronation. I had stocked the Sub-Zero refrigerator with Wagyu beef, truffles, and champagne. I had hired a private decorating service to set up a 12-foot Douglas fir in the main atrium, adorned with hand-blown glass ornaments, and then I had dismissed the staff so I could be completely, utterly alone. I wanted to walk through these 3 stories of architectural brilliance naked if I wanted to. I wanted to scream into the canyon and hear my own voice echo back, validated by the mountains. I turned away from the window and walked across the heated travertine floors toward the kitchen island. The house was so smart, it practically breathed. The lights adjusted automatically to my movement, casting a warm amber glow that softened the sharp modern angles of the furniture. I was safe here. I was untouchable. Then, the noise sliced through the peace like a physical blow. It was the security buzzer. I froze, my wine glass hovering halfway to my mouth. It was a harsh, jarring sound, completely alien in this carefully curated silence. Who would be up here? The private road to the summit was treacherous even in good weather. In a blizzard like this, it was suicidal. I set the glass down and walked to the wall-mounted interface near the foyer. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that annoyed me. I tapped the screen to wake up the external camera feed. The high-definition night vision cameras cut through the darkness and the driving snow, revealing the front gate. I blinked, sure that the wine was hallucinating for me. Parked haphazardly in front of my 10-foot steel gates was a sedan. It was a rental, a cheap, compact model that was already half buried in a snowdrift. The engine was running, puffing weak clouds of exhaust into the storm, but it was the two figures standing outside the car that made the blood drain from my face. They were huddled together, stomping their feet in the snow, wearing coats that were far too thin for a Colorado winter. The wind whipped at them, tearing at their clothes, but I recognized the posture immediately. I recognized the way the woman clutched her handbag to her chest. I recognized the impatient, demanding tilt of the man's head as he pressed the buzzer again, and again, and again. Robert and Linda Breyer, my parents. I took a step back from the screen, a laugh bubbling up in my throat that sounded more like a choke. This was impossible. They were supposed to be in Aspen proper, or maybe Vail, or wherever people who pretended to be wealthy went to be seen. They did not know this address. No one knew this address except my realtor and my lawyer. I watched them on the screen. My father looked older than I remembered. His hair was thinner, whipped into a frenzy by the wind, and his face was gray. My mother looked frantic, her makeup smeared, shivering violently as she hugged herself. Next to them, piled in the snow like wet cardboard, were 5 large suitcases. They were not just visiting. You do not bring 5 suitcases for a cup of coffee. My finger hovered over the intercom button. The rational, protective part of my brain screamed at me to leave them there. They had left me in the cold for 15 years metaphorically, emotionally, and financially. Why should I care if they froze physically? It would be poetic justice. I could go back to my Wagyu beef and my Pinot Noir and let the storm handle the rest. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a name I had not seen in years. Mom. I swiped it open. The message was short and riddled with typos. We know you are in there, Amelia. Open the gate. Your father is having a hypoglycemia attack. He has no sugar. Please. I stared at the text. Hypoglycemia. It was the perfect weapon. My father had been managing his blood sugar for 20 years. He knew better than to travel without supplies. But the doubt, that insidious, trained, daughterly guilt, wormed its way into my gut. If he collapsed out there, if he died at my gate, the headlines would not be about my triumph. They would be about the heartless tech CEO who let her parents freeze to death. I looked back at the monitor. Robert did look unsteady. He was leaning heavily against the hood of the rental car. "Damn it," I whispered. The sound was sharp in the empty hall. I pressed the button to release the magnetic lock on the pedestrian gate. I did not open the main gate for the car. I wanted them to walk. I wanted them to drag those suitcases up the heated driveway themselves. "Come in," I said into the intercom, my voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "The code is 4821. I watched on the screen as they scrambled through the pedestrian gate. My father suddenly seemed to find a reserve of energy, grabbing 2 suitcases while my mother took the others. They struggled up the driveway, slipping on the patches where the heating elements hadn't quite melted the ice yet. I walked to the massive front door, a slab of solid oak that weighed 400 pounds, and unlocked it. I did not step out to help them. I stood in the foyer, wearing my silk cashmere lounge set, and waited. It took them 5 minutes to reach the door. When it finally swung open, a gust of freezing wind blew into the house, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly on the warm floor. My parents tumbled inside, dropping the wet suitcases onto the pristine travertine with a wet thud. They were a mess. My mother's mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivulets. My father was gasping for air, his face red from the cold and exertion. They stood there, dripping melting snow, shivering, bringing the chaos of the storm into my perfect sanctuary. I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against the archway that led to the great room. I waited for the apology. I waited for the explanation. I waited for a "thank you for saving us." My mother straightened up. She brushed the snow off her coat, sending a spray of water onto a nearby abstract sculpture. She didn't look at me at first. Her eyes darted around the space, taking in the 30-foot ceilings, the custom chandelier that looked like falling rain frozen in crystal, the floating staircase, and the expansive view of the storm-battered valley beyond the glass. Her shivering stopped. Her eyes widened, not with fear or relief, but with a sudden, sharp calculation. It was a look I knew well. It was the look she used to give Julianne when she won a beauty pageant, a look of appraisal, of ownership. She finally turned her gaze to me. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a terrifying, predatory satisfaction. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't hug me. She didn't mention my father's medical emergency. Instead, she stepped further into the room, her wet boots squeaking on the expensive floor, and delivered the first sentence she had spoken to me in over a decade. "Well," Linda said, her voice dripping with a mixture of shock and greed as she gestured vaguely at the multi-million-dollar estate surrounding us. "Finally, you did something useful." Useful? The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, instantly sucking the oxygen out of the cavernous foyer. My mother, Linda, did not wait for a reaction. She breezed past me, shedding her sodden coat and dropping it onto the floor without a second glance, operating under the muscle memory of a woman who had spent her entire life expecting someone else to pick up after her. "It is a bit cold, though," she critiqued, rubbing her arms as she surveyed the minimalist architecture of the great room. "And this gray stone, it feels like a mausoleum. Honestly, Amelia, with this kind of square footage, I would have expected something warmer. Maybe some Tuscan yellow or floral drapery. This looks like a sterile dental clinic." My father, the man who was allegedly on the brink of a diabetic coma just minutes ago, had miraculously recovered the moment he stepped onto the heated floors. He was currently tapping his knuckles against a floating walnut shelf, testing its sturdiness with a frown of disapproval. "It is all facade," Robert grunted, wiping his wet nose with a handkerchief. "Modern junk. No soul. How much are you renting this place for? Tell me you did not actually buy it. Real estate in this economy is a fool's game." I watched them, fascinated in a detached, scientific way. It was like observing an invasive species introduce itself to a new ecosystem. They had been in my home for less than 3 minutes, and already they had insulted my taste, dismissed my achievements, and treated my $15 million sanctuary like a subpar Airbnb. "I own it," I said, my voice flat. I picked up my mother's coat from the floor. Not to be helpful, but because the dripping water was going to stain the travertine. I hung it on the rack with deliberate slowness. "And Robert, there is a bowl of organic fruit on the counter if your blood sugar is actually low. Or was that just a performance to get the gate open?" My father waved a dismissive hand, already wandering toward the kitchen. "I am feeling better. Adrenaline. Seeing you living. Like this. It was a shock." "How did you find me?" I asked. Cutting to the chase, I walked to the kitchen island, placing a safe distance of marble between us. "My address is unlisted. My purchase was made through an LLC. There is no public record linking Amelia Breyer to Silver Peak Summit." Linda laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. She began opening my cabinets, peering inside at my collection of Japanese ceramic ware. "Oh, stop it with the paranoia. A mother knows. Amelia, We have our ways. Call it parental intuition. We just knew our little girl was out here all alone in the mountains. Parental intuition does not give you gate codes or GPS coordinates to a private road that does not exist on Apple Maps, I countered, leaning against the counter. You hired a private investigator. They exchanged a quick, shifty glance, the kind of silent communication practiced by people who have spent decades covering for each other's lies. It does not matter how we got here, Robert said loudly, opening my refrigerator and frowning at the lack of processed cheese. The point is, we are here, and just in time. The weather report says this storm is going to last for days. We could not possibly drive back down in that rental trap. We will have to stay for Christmas. He said it as a statement of fact, not a question. Stay, I repeated, for Christmas. To heal, Linda added, finally turning to face me. She adopted a soft, wounded expression that I recognized from 1,000 previous guilt trips. We have been apart too long. Amelia, 15 years. It is unnatural. We want to fix this. We want to be a family again. I looked at the pile of luggage in the foyer. 5 massive suitcases, 2 carry-ons, a garment bag. You brought enough clothes to survive an apocalypse, I noted dryly. That does not look like a weekend visit. That looks like a relocation. Don't be dramatic, Linda snapped, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it back into place. We just wanted to be prepared. We have been worried about you, all alone up here. It is not healthy for a woman your age to be so isolated. People talk. You know. I do not care what people say. Well, we do, she retorted. Now, where's the guest room or the servants' quarters? Wherever you want to put us. We are not picky. I should have kicked them out. I should have called security and had them escorted off the property. But the roads were genuinely lethal tonight. And despite everything, the biological imperative to not murder my parents by negligence was still annoyingly active in my brain. Down the hall. Second door on the left, I said, resigning myself to the nightmare. One night, as soon as the plows clear the road, you are leaving. They did not hear me. They were already dragging their suitcases down the hallway, arguing about who got the side of the bed nearest the bathroom. Dinner was an exercise in psychological warfare. I had planned to sear a Wagyu steak for myself, but with 3 people, I had to pivot. I made a simple pasta with truffle oil and parmesan. My parents ate it with the ravenous hunger of people who had been surviving on fast food. Yet they managed to critique every bite. It is a bit al dente, isn't it? Robert mumbled around a mouthful. Undercooked. It is supposed to be al dente, I said, pouring myself a second glass of wine. I did not offer them any. Julianne makes the most wonderful lasagna, Linda sighed, staring wistfully into her wineless glass. Soft, cheesy, comfort food. Not this fancy chef nonsense. You remember your sister's cooking, don't you? Amelia. There it was, the ghost at the banquet. I haven't spoken to Julianne in 15 years, I reminded them. So, no, I don't recall her lasagna. She misses you, Linda lied effortlessly. She asks about you all the time. Poor thing. She has been having such a run of bad luck lately. Just terrible luck. I swirled the wine in my glass. Is that so? Oh, dreadful, Robert chimed in, leaning forward. The economy has been hard on her. She is an artist, you know, a sensitive soul. Not like you. She trusts people too much. She got involved in some business investments that went south. It's completely not her fault. She was taken advantage of. Let me guess, I said, my voice cool. She needs money. She needs support, Linda corrected sharply. Family support, which you would understand if you weren't so detached. You know, we didn't push you away. Amelia, you walked away. You were always so difficult to connect with, so prickly. Even as a child, you preferred your books to people. We tried our best, but you made it impossible to love you the way we loved Julianne. The gaslighting was so textbook it was almost impressive. They were rewriting history in real time, painting me as the villain of my own abandonment. I walked away because you forgot my high school graduation to go to Julianne's dance recital, I said, keeping my tone even. I walked away because you spent my college fund on a boat. That boat was an investment. Robert slammed his hand on the table. And we lost it in the recession. You always bring up the past. You hold grudges. It is a very unattractive quality. That is probably why you are alone. He looked around the room again, his eyes narrowing. Speaking of which, who is he? Who is who? The man, Robert said, gesturing at the house. The one paying for all this. Or did you win the lottery? Because we know you were working in some lab. Scientists do not make this kind of money. Did you marry a CEO? Is he old? Is that why he isn't here? They couldn't conceive of it. The idea that I, the failure, the difficult one, had built this empire with my own brain was simply incompatible with their worldview. There is no man, I said clearly. I built a company. I sold a company. This is my money, my house, my wine. They stared at me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something like fear in their eyes. The fear of the prey realizing the predator is larger than expected. But then, greed washed it away. Well, Linda said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. That is wonderful news. That means you are in a position to help. God has finally blessed you so you can bless your family. I stood up, the chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. I have some work to finish. Leave the dishes in the sink. Do not touch anything else. I walked out of the room, feeling their eyes on my back like laser sights. Once I was safely inside my office, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. I pulled out my encrypted phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It is Christmas Eve, Amelia. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the first ring. If you are calling me, either you have been arrested or you are bored. Marcus, I said, I need you to run a full background check on Robert and Linda Breyer, and Julianne, right now. Your parents? Marcus Thorne's voice shifted from amused to alert. I thought they were dead to you. They are currently in my living room eating my truffles, I said. They showed up unannounced. They claim it is a surprise visit, but they have 5 suitcases and they are acting desperate. They think I am some sort of lottery winner they can manipulate. I need to know why they are really here. Check for debts, lawsuits, liens. Check everything. Give me 2 hours, Marcus said. I will have their financial autopsies on your desk. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I know the drill, Marcus. And Amelia. Yes. Check your silver. People like that usually start with the small things. I hung up and stared at the monitors on my wall. I had installed a state-of-the-art internal security system when I bought the house, mostly to monitor the staff I eventually planned to hire. I never thought I would use it to spy on my own parents. I pulled up the feed for the living room. Robert and Linda were not washing the dishes. They were walking around the room, touching everything. Robert was looking at the back of the television. Linda was inspecting the label on the rug. I turned up the volume on the microphone. Easily 10,000 for the rug. Linda was whispering. It is Persian. Silk. The electronics are worth more, Robert muttered. But look at that thing. He pointed up at the custom chandelier, the one that looked like frozen rain. How are we going to move that? Linda hissed. It is huge. We don't move it, Robert said, his voice low and greedy. We sell it with the house when we liquidate, but if we had to strip it, the crystals alone, that is a Chihuly custom. I looked it up. Bouncing back from a bankruptcy is easy when you have assets like this to strip. Selling that chandelier alone would get us $50,000, maybe more on the black market. She suspects nothing, Linda whispered, picking up a small jade statue and slipping it into her pocket. She is so desperate for our approval. Did you see her face when we said we would stay? She is weak. We just have to play nice for a few days. Get her to sign the power of attorney. And then we bring Julianne in, Robert finished. And we finally get what we deserve. I watched them on the screen, the gray scale making them look like ghouls. $50,000 for my chandelier. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to harvest me. I sat back in my chair and watched them, a dark, icy resolve settling in my chest. They wanted to play a game, fine. They had no idea that they had just locked themselves in a cage with a monster they created. "Merry Christmas, Mom and Dad," I whispered to the screen. "Welcome to hell." The notification from Marcus Thorne arrived at 3 in the morning, shattering the fragile silence I had managed to construct around myself. My phone vibrated against the mahogany nightstand, a single sharp buzz that felt less like a message and more like a warning shot. I was already awake. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford with 2 predators sleeping down the hall. I sat up in bed, the silk sheets pooling around my waist, and opened the secure file attached to Marcus's email. The subject line was typically brief, priority level alpha. Read immediately. As I scrolled through the PDF, the cold light of the screen illuminated the horror of my reality. I thought I had reached the bottom of my family's depravity when I heard them pricing my chandelier. But Marcus Efficient, terrifying Marcus, had handed me a shovel and showed me that the hole went much, much deeper. The first revelation hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The house in Ohio. The colonial-style home where I had grown up, where I had spent 18 years trying to be invisible. Where my height marks were still etched into the pantry doorframe was gone. It was not just sold, it was liquidated. According to the property records Marcus had pulled, Robert and Linda Breyer had sold their primary residence 3 months ago for cash, at 20% below market value to ensure a quick close. They were not tourists. They were not visitors. They were homeless. I read on, my breath hitching in my throat. The proceeds from the sale, roughly $400,000, had been wired immediately to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and from there, it had vanished into a black hole of debt settlement agencies. And then came the section on Julianne. My sister was not having a run of bad luck. She was in the middle of a federal investigation. The report detailed her involvement in a phantom cryptocurrency scheme called Golden Era, where she had convinced dozens of investors, mostly retirees and friends of the family, to pour their life savings into a platform that did not exist. She was currently out on bail, awaiting a hearing for wire fraud and grand larceny. The bail amount had been set at $250,000. The math was simple, brutal, and sickening. My parents had sold their home and effectively their entire lives to post bail for their golden child and pay off the most aggressive of her loan sharks. Now, they had nothing left. No home, no assets, no retirement fund. Except for me. I was not a daughter to them. I was an escape hatch. I was the bailout package. They intended to move into Silver Peak Summit, establish residency, and use my assets to shield Julianne from the legal tsunami heading her way. I closed the laptop with a snap. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a mixture of fury and adrenaline. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The ambiguity was gone. This was not a family reunion. It was a hostile takeover. I waited until the sun began to bleed over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, painting the snow in hues of violent orange and pink. I dressed in a sharp-tailored suit armor for the modern battlefield and walked downstairs. The house was quiet, but it felt different. It felt violated. I headed straight for my home office on the main floor. I had locked it the night before, a simple turn of the privacy lock, but as I approached, I saw the door standing ajar. Rage, hot and white, flared behind my eyes. I pushed the door open. Linda was sitting at my desk, my massive, custom-built oak desk. She had opened the drawers and was systematically going through my file folders. A stack of papers, my bank statements, the deed to the house, the Ether Genetics contract was spread out across the surface like a buffet. She looked up as I entered, and for a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, the entitlement kicked in. She did not scramble to hide what she was doing. She simply adjusted her reading glasses and frowned at a document in her hand. "You really should organize these better, Amelia," she said, her voice critical. It took me 10 minutes to find the property tax records. And why do you have so many separate accounts? It is very confusing. I walked over to the desk, grabbed the papers from her hand, and slammed them down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Get out of my chair," I said. My voice was low, deadly quiet. Linda blinked, feigning shock. "Excuse me. There is no need to be rude. I am your mother. I am just trying to help you get your affairs in order. If we are going to be living here, we need to understand the household budget." "There is no we," I snapped, "and there is no budget for you to manage. You broke into my locked office." "I used a hairpin," she waved a hand dismissively. "The lock is flimsy, and do not use that tone with me. We are family. Everything you have is ours, and everything we have is yours. That is how it works." "Is that so?" I leaned over the desk, invading her personal space. "Is that why you sold the house in Ohio? Is that why you are homeless? Is that why you liquidated 40 years of equity to pay for Julianne's fraud?" Linda's face went pale. She stood up, knocking the chair back. How do you know that?" "I know everything," I lied, though I knew enough. "I know about the gambling debts. I know about the lawsuit. I know that you are not here to visit. You are here because you have nowhere else to go." Robert appeared in the doorway then, wearing one of my guest bathrobes. He looked from me to Linda, sensing the tension. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice thick with sleep. "She knows." "Robert," Linda whispered, her eyes wide. Then, in a heartbeat, her demeanor shifted. The shock evaporated, replaced by a wet, trembling patheticism. She brought her hands to her face and started to sob. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. "Oh, Amelia," she wailed, collapsing back into my chair. "You have no idea how hard it has been. We did it for her. She is your sister. She made a mistake, a tiny mistake, and these vultures, they want to put her in prison, our little Julianne, in a cage." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were hard and demanding. "You have so much. Amelia, look at this place. It is a palace. You have millions sitting in the bank, doing nothing, and you would let your own sister rot in a cell. Where is your heart?" "My heart is fine," I said, crossing my arms. "My wallet, however, is closed to criminals." "She is not a criminal," Robert roared, stepping into the room, his face flushed a deep, dangerous red. "She is a visionary. She was just ahead of the market, and you ungrateful, cold-hearted witch. We sacrificed everything for you girls. We sold the roof over our heads to save this family. And you stand there in your $1,000 suit and judge us." "You sold the roof over your heads to save her," I corrected him. "You didn't call me when you were in trouble. You didn't ask me for advice. You just assumed you could show up here and parasitize my life because you failed to fix hers." "We are your parents," Robert shouted, slamming his hand against the doorframe. "We have rights you owe us. We raised you. We fed you. And now that you have struck gold, you think you can just discard us. This house is 10,000 square feet. It is obscene for one person. It is too big for you." He took a step toward me, his finger jabbing in the air. "Julianne will have the east wing. It has the best light for her painting. She needs peace and quiet to recover from this trauma." I froze. "The east wing." Robert realized his mistake a second too late. He clamped his mouth shut, but the truth was already out, squirming on the floor. "She is not coming here," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "I distinctly remember telling you that she is not welcome." "Well, it is a bit late for that," Robert muttered, dropping the pretense. He sneered at me, a look of pure disdain. "She is already on her way. In fact, she will be here today, and you will welcome her. You will open that gate, and you will give her a room, and you will write a check to her lawyer. Or what?" I challenged myself. "You will ground me. I am 34 years old. I own this property. I can have you removed for trespassing in 10 minutes. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It went from heated to something darker, something sinister. Linda stopped crying instantly. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up. Standing next to Robert, they presented a united front, a wall of malice. "You really do not want to do that, Amelia," Linda said softly. "Think about how it would look. The wealthy CEO throwing her elderly, homeless parents out into a blizzard. The press would eat you alive. Ether Genetics would not like that kind of publicity. And besides," Robert added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we have been very worried about your mental state lately. You have been so isolated. Withdrawal from society is a classic symptom. Isn't it paranoia? Delusions of grandeur, buying a fortress in the middle of nowhere." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "We are your parents." Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If we tell the authorities that we are concerned, that you are a danger to yourself, that you are not capable of managing your own vast assets, well, courts tend to listen to loving parents, especially when there is a history of emotional instability." "I have no history of emotional instability," I said. "We can remember some instances." Robert shrugged. "Teenage years, mood swings, depression. It is all about the narrative. Amelia, you of all people should know that. Do you really want to fight us? Or do you want to be a good daughter and share?" It was a threat, a naked, ugly threat of conservatorship. They were threatening Britney Spears with me. They wanted to declare me incompetent so they could legally seize control of my fortune. I looked at them, the people who gave me life, and felt the final, lingering thread of attachment snap. There was no love here. There was only a transaction. I was about to respond, to tell them that I would burn this house to the ground before I let them take a single brick, when the intercom system chimed throughout the house. Ding dong! We all turned to the window. The storm had broken for a moment, leaving the sky a piercing, brilliant blue. Down at the main gate, a car was waiting. It was not a rental. It was a bright red, convertible sports car, a model that cost upwards of $200,000. The top was down, despite the freezing temperature, because the driver clearly wanted to be seen. The horn honked, a long, obnoxious blast that echoed off the canyon walls. I looked at the monitor on my desk. There she was, Julianne. She was wearing a white faux fur coat and oversized sunglasses, looking like a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi. She leaned out of the driver's window and waved at the security camera, flashing a dazzling, perfect smile that had charmed investors out of millions. The car still had the dealer plates on it. I knew, with absolute certainty, that she had not made a single payment on it. "Open the gate, Amelia." Linda clapped her hands, her face lighting up with genuine joy for the first time since she arrived. "Your sister is home." I looked at the screen, at the sister who had never called, never texted, never cared, until I became a bank account. I looked at my parents, who were already rushing toward the front door, forgetting their threats, forgetting me, drawn to their golden idol like moths to a flame. "She is not home," I whispered to the empty room. "She is trespassing." But I pressed the button to open the gate anyway, not because I was surrendering, but because if I was going to destroy them, I needed all of them under one roof. I needed the infection to be contained before I could sterilize it. I watched the red car roar up my driveway, the engine growling like a beast. The invasion was complete. Now, the war could truly begin. I left the house for exactly 2 hours. I needed to meet a security contractor in town, a quiet, muscular man named Silas, who specialized in corporate espionage defense, to pick up a box of equipment that I could not trust with a delivery drone. When I drove back up the winding mountain road, the storm had temporarily abated, leaving the world suspended in a pristine, deceptive silence. The snowdrifts were piled high against the trunks of the lodgepole pines, beautiful and suffocating. I parked my SUV in the heated garage next to Julianne's obnoxious red convertible. The sight of it made my jaw tighten. It was a stain on my sanctuary, a glaring reminder that the infection had breached the perimeter. I walked into the house through the mudroom, carrying the heavy black case of equipment. The house was quiet, but it was a heavy silence. The air smelled different. It no longer smelled of cedar and ozone. It smelled of heavy floral perfume and stale cigarette smoke, even though I had a strict no-smoking policy. I ascended the floating staircase to the third floor, heading for the master suite, my sanctuary, the one place I had designated as inviolable. The door was open. I stopped in the doorway, and for a moment, my brain refused to process the visual data. My clothes, my bespoke silk blouses, my cashmere sweaters, my tailored slacks were lying in a heap in the hallway. They had not been folded or placed. They had been thrown, scooped out of the walk-in closet in armfuls and dumped onto the floor like garbage. I stepped into the room. Julianne was lying in my bed. She was wearing one of my silk robes, the sash tied loosely around her waist, holding a glass of my most expensive champagne. She was watching cartoons on the 80-inch television that retracted into the ceiling. Her feet, still wearing dirty boots, were resting on the Egyptian cotton duvet cover. She looked up as I entered, her eyes glassy and defiant. She did not flinch. She did not look guilty. She looked like a queen who had finally reclaimed her throne. "Oh, you are back," she said, her voice scratching against the silence. "I hope you do not mind. Mom said the guest room in the East Wing had a draft, and honestly, Amelia, this mattress is much better for my back. The stress of the investigation has really flared up my sciatica." She took a sip of champagne, leaving a smudge of bright red lipstick on the crystal rim. "I put your things in the hall," she continued, waving a hand vaguely. "You can take the guest room downstairs. It is closer to the kitchen, which is convenient since you seem to be the only one who knows how to work that ridiculous espresso machine." My hands, hanging by my sides, curled into fists. The urge to drag her out of that bed by her hair was so visceral, so violent, that it terrified me. This was my room. This was where I slept. This was where I had cried the first night I spent here, overwhelmed by the realization that I was finally free. And now, she was marinating in it, contaminating it with her entitlement. But I did not scream. I did not throw the equipment case at her. I did not call the police. Instead, I forced the muscles in my face to relax. I smoothed my expression into a mask of icy indifference. A slow, chilling smile spread across my lips, not a smile of amusement, but the baring of teeth before the bite. "Make yourself comfortable, Julianne," I said softly. "The view from here is to die for." I turned on my heel and walked out, stepping over my pile of clothes without looking down. Julianne shouted something after me, probably expecting a fight, probably disappointed that I had not given her the drama she fed on, but I was done with drama. I was moving straight to warfare. I moved into the guest room on the lower level, a stark, concrete-walled room that I had originally designed as a panic room. It was fitting. From there, I began my counterinsurgency. For the next 6 hours, while my family slept off their midday drinking, I went to work. I used the equipment I had purchased from Silas. I installed micro cameras in the smoke detectors, the light fixtures, and the decorative molding. I placed high-fidelity audio bugs behind the paintings and under the marble countertops. I turned Silver Peak Summit into a panopticon. Every whisper, every phone call, every sneeze would be recorded, cataloged, and stored on an encrypted server that only I could access. By the time evening fell, I was no longer just living in my house. I was monitoring it. The invasion escalated 2 days later. I was in my makeshift office in the panic room when I heard the bass thumping through the floorboards. It was deep into the night, perhaps 2 a.m. I checked the monitors. The great room was packed, not with my family, but with strangers. My parents had thrown a party. I walked upstairs, wearing a simple black turtleneck and slacks, blending into the shadows. The room was filled with people I vaguely recognized, wealthy locals, real estate agents from Aspen, a few socialites who owned vacation homes in the valley. Robert and Linda were holding court by the fireplace, pouring my vintage scotch as if it were tap water. "Yes, it is a lovely little retreat," Linda was saying to a woman wearing a fur coat that cost more than a Honda. "We bought it as a getaway for the girls. You know how stressful the city can be. Robert wanted something rustic, but I insisted on the modern touches." We are thinking of adding a helipad next spring, Robert added, puffing on a cigar. Ash was falling onto my cream-colored rug. The drive is just too tedious. I walked into the room. The crowd parted slightly. I saw Julianne near the DJ booth. They had actually hired a DJ dancing wildly with a man who looked like he belonged on a yacht in Miami. A woman with surgically enhanced cheekbones turned to me, holding an empty glass. "Oh, excuse me," she said, thrusting the glass at my chest. "Could you get me a refill? A vodka tonic? Plenty of lime?" I stared at the glass. Then I looked at Linda, who had spotted me. Her eyes widened in warning. "Oh, there she is," Linda exclaimed, rushing over and draping a heavy, possessive arm around my shoulders. She squeezed hard, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Everyone, this is Amelia, our eldest." She leaned in toward the woman with the empty glass and lowered her voice to a stage whisper. "She is a bit eccentric. She prefers to handle the domestic side of things. It gives her structure. We try to support her however we can." "She is our little project," Robert boomed, laughing heartily. "Every family has one, right? The artist, the dreamer, the one who needs a little extra help launching." The guests nodded sympathetically. They looked at me with pity. To them, I was not the biotech CEO who had revolutionized gene sequencing. I was the charity case, the live-in maid, the failure who was lucky to be allowed under the roof of these magnificent, generous people. "I will get you that drink," I said to the woman, my voice devoid of inflection. I took the glass. I walked to the kitchen. I set the glass in the sink and watched on the monitors as Robert and Linda continued to spin their web of lies. Using my achievements to build a pedestal for themselves, they were stealing my identity, my success, and my dignity in real time. But the real crime was happening in the shadows. Later that night, after the last guest had stumbled out into the snow, I sat in the dark watching the feed from the library. Robert was sitting at my desk again. He was on the phone, his voice hushed and urgent. "Yes, this is Mr. Breyer. I am calling on behalf of my daughter, Amelia Breyer. She is indisposed at the moment. Yes, medical issues. She has granted me power of attorney regarding the property." He paused, listening. "We are looking to take out a line of credit against the equity, $2 million, expedited. We need the cash flow for renovations. Yes, I can send the paperwork over. I have her signature right here." I zoomed in on the video feed. Robert had a sheet of paper in front of him. He was holding a pen, practicing my signature over and over again. Amelia Breyer, Amelia Breyer, Amelia Breyer. He was clumsy, he was desperate, and he was committing a federal felony on camera. I could have stopped him. I could have walked in there and torn the phone from his hand. I could have called the bank and flagged the account. I did nothing. I let the recording run. I watched him trace the curves of my name, stealing my authority with every stroke. I needed the attempt to be completed. Attempted fraud was good. Executed fraud was better. I needed the bank to receive those documents. I needed the paper trail to be undeniable. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Amelia," he said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "I just got an alert from your bank. Someone is trying to access the equity line on the house. Tell me you shut this down." "Let it go through," I said. "Are you insane?" Marcus hissed. "That is fraud. If the bank processes it and then finds out it is fake, your assets could be frozen during the investigation. Kick them out. Amelia, you have enough evidence for a restraining order right now. Why are you playing with fire?" "Because a restraining order is just a piece of paper," I said, watching Robert on the screen as he successfully forged my signature on the loan application. "They will violate it. They will come back. They will harass me for the rest of my life. I do not want to push them away. Marcus, I want to bury them." "This is dangerous," Marcus warned. "You are letting them think they have won." "Exactly," I replied. "I want them to feel safe. I want them to think they have successfully conquered the castle. I want them to be so high on their own victory that they do not see the floor dropping out until they are already falling." "You are scary when you are like this," Marcus murmured. I learned from the best, I said, and hung up. The next morning, I initiated the final phase of the setup. I walked into the kitchen where the three of them were nursing hangovers. The kitchen was a disaster zone: empty bottles, dirty plates, cigarette ash in the sink. They looked at me with hostility, expecting a lecture. Instead, I placed a folder on the counter. I am tired of fighting, I said, keeping my eyes lowered, feigning defeat. You win. You are my family. I cannot kick you out. Linda perked up instantly, her headache forgotten. Well, finally, some sense. I spoke to my lawyer. I lied. He drafted these. It is a family support agreement. It formally acknowledges your residency here. It gives you access to the guest accounts for expenses. I pushed the folder toward them. And, I added, pausing for effect, it includes a clause that I will cover Julianne's legal fees, up to $500,000. Julianne gasped. She jumped off the bar stool and snatched the folder. Seriously? I do not want my sister in jail, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. Just, please, stop the parties. Stop the fighting. Let's just live here quietly. Robert grabbed the pen before I could even finish the sentence. He didn't read the document. Neither did Linda. They saw the dollar signs. They saw the surrender. This is the least you could do, Robert grunted, signing his name with a flourish, the same hand that had forged mine the night before. After everything we sacrificed for you, we are just taking back what is owed, Linda added, signing next. They signed it, all three of them. They thought they were signing a support agreement. In reality, the document was a masterstroke of legal entrapment that Marcus and I had drafted at 4 a.m. Buried in the dense legal jargon of Section 8 Clause C was a stipulation that the signatories accepted full personal liability for any illicit financial activities conducted on the premises. But more importantly, the document they just signed was an affidavit of solvency, a sworn statement that they had no outstanding debts or judgments. Since Julianne was currently being sued and my parents were insolvent, they had just committed perjury. They had just signed a lie that would invalidate any protection they claimed to have. And by accepting residency under these terms, they had legally tied their fate to a contract that authorized me to record their conversations without further consent, nullifying any expectation of privacy defense they might try to use in court later. I took the folder back, clutching it to my chest like a shield. Thank you, I whispered. Good, Robert said, turning back to his coffee. Now, clean this kitchen up. We have guests coming for lunch. I walked away, clutching the signed death warrants of their freedom. They were celebrating their victory. They had the house. They had the money. They had the submissive daughter back under their thumb. They had no idea that they were standing on a trapdoor, and I had just greased the hinges. The war for my life had moved from physical invasion to psychological siege. The strategy my parents employed was ancient and effective, a method used by abusive regimes and toxic families for centuries. If you cannot control the person, you control the narrative about the person. It started with the whispers. I have always been a private person, preferring the company of data sets to dinner parties, but in the small, insular world of high-end Aspen real estate and biotech venture capital, silence is often interpreted as illness. My parents began to fill that silence with poison. I intercepted the emails first. Robert had been using my guest Wi-Fi, which was routed through a packet sniffer I controlled. He was emailing my former board members at Ether Genetics, sending concerned father messages. He claimed I was suffering from a severe manic episode. He apologized for any erratic behavior I might have displayed, subtly planting the seed that my recent decision to sell the company and move to the mountains was not a strategic exit, but a mental breakdown. Then came the neighbors, Mrs. Gable, the woman who owned the estate down the valley. Called the house line, Linda answered. I listened from the panic room as my mother lowered her voice to a tragic, conspiratorial hush. Yes, we are just so worried, Linda said, sighing theatrically. She is seeing things. Poor dear. Paranoia. She thinks people are spying on her. We are trying to keep it quiet. Of course, we just want to get her the help she refuses to take. They were painting a picture of a madwoman in the attic. They were building the case that I was unfit to manage my own affairs, and to make the lie a reality. They decided to help the symptoms along. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The storm outside had settled into a low, menacing gray haze. I was in my office, monitoring the kitchen feed, when I saw Linda crushing something on the granite countertop. She had a small mortar and pestle she must have brought with her. She was grinding 3 blue pills into a fine powder. I zoomed in. I recognized the shape of the bottle on the counter. It was a prescription sedative, heavy-duty stuff usually reserved for severe anxiety or insomnia. She stirred the powder into a pot of tomato basil soup simmering on the stove. She tasted it, added a pinch of salt to mask the bitterness, and smiled. It was a smile of pure malice. "Dinner is ready." "Darling," she called out 10 minutes later, her voice singing with maternal warmth. I walked into the dining room. The table was set. Robert and Julianne were already seated, watching me with predatory intensity. There was a bowl of soup at my place. "You look tired." "Amelia," Robert said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "You have been working too hard. You need to eat. Linda made your favorite." "It is just a simple recipe," Linda said, ladling more soup into my bowl. "Eat up. It will help you sleep." I looked at the soup. It looked perfectly normal. It smelled of basil and cream. If I had not seen the camera feed, I would have eaten it without a second thought. "I forgot my phone in the office," I said, standing up. "Start without me." "Sit down," Robert barked, then softened his tone. "The soup will get cold." "I will be right back," I insisted. I walked to the kitchen. I quickly grabbed a ladle and a spare bowl from the cabinet. I poured a small amount of the untainted soup from the pot the dregs Linda hadn't served yet into the spare bowl. Then, I returned to the dining room. Concealing the switch by creating a diversion, I deliberately tripped over the rug, dropping my phone with a loud clatter. "Clumsy," Julianne sneered, while they all looked at the phone skittering across the floor. I swapped the bowls with a sleight of hand I had practiced a dozen times in my mind. I sat down and ate the soup. They watched me take every spoonful. They were practically holding their breath. 20 minutes later, I began my performance. I let my eyelids droop. I slurred a word in the middle of a sentence. I let my hand slip off the table, the spoon clattering onto the floor. "I feel strange," I mumbled, blinking slowly. "So dizzy." "It is just exhaustion, sweetheart," Linda cooed, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Why don't you lie down on the sofa? We will take care of everything." I stumbled to the living room sofa and collapsed, feigning a deep, chemically induced sleep. Through my eyelashes, I watched them. They did not cover me with a blanket. They did not check my pulse. They stood over me like vultures. "It works fast," Robert whispered. "Is she out?" Julianne kicked my foot. Hard. I did not flinch. "She is out," Julianne said. "God, she is pathetic. Look at her. 34 years old. Wearing a suit inside her own house? Does she even own a pair of sweatpants?" "Leave her alone," Linda said, but she was already rifling through my pockets. She pulled out my house keys. "We have maybe 4 hours before she wakes up. Robert, call the lawyer. Julianne, go check the safe in her closet." "I hate her," Julianne hissed, staring down at me. "She thinks she is so much better than us because she made some money. But look at her. No husband, no kids, just a cold, empty house and a bank account. She is nothing. She is a womb that dried up and a heart that froze over. I am doing her a favor by taking this money. At least I know how to enjoy life." Her words were meant to cut, to humiliate, but lying there, pretending to be comatose, I felt nothing but a cold, scientific detachment. She was projecting her own insecurity onto me. She measured worth by attention and consumption. I measured it by autonomy. Robert walked into the hallway, phone in hand. I focused on his voice, recording everything in my memory to cross-reference with the audio bugs later. "Mr. Vance," Robert said. "Yes, it is Robert Breyer. We are ready to move forward. The situation has deteriorated. Amelia is, well, she is incoherent. We had to sedate her for her own safety. She was becoming violent. He paused, listening. Yes, a conservatorship, emergency temporary guardianship. We need to freeze the accounts before she gives it all away to some cult or scam. She is not in her right mind. We have witnesses. The neighbors know. We have the medical history. Well, we can create the history. Vance, that was the name. The next morning, while my family slept in, satisfied that their drugged daughter was safely neutralized, I slipped out of the house. I took the service exit in the garage and hiked a mile down the snow-packed road to where I had arranged for a private car to meet me. I went to see Dr. Aris, a forensic psychiatrist in Denver who was known for his discretion and his ironclad reputation in court. I had booked the appointment under a pseudonym 3 days ago. I need a full mental capacity evaluation. I told him, I need you to test me for everything: bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, dementia, paranoia, and I need the results notarized and time-stamped for today. Doctor, Aris spent 4 hours with me. We did cognitive tests, personality assessments, and a full clinical interview. By the end of it, he handed me a sealed file. You are hypervigilant, Ms. Breyer, he said, peering over his spectacles. And your stress levels are elevated, but you are categorically sane. Your cognitive functions are superior. Anyone claiming you are incompetent would be laughed out of court. Thank you, I said. That is exactly what I needed to hear. On the ride back, I opened my laptop and went hunting for Mr. Vance. It did not take long. A lawyer willing to help a family hijack a fortune based on a few phone calls was usually not a top-tier legal mind. I found a trembling digital trail. Gerald Vance. He was currently practicing in Colorado, but his history was checkered. He had been disbarred in Florida 5 years ago for mishandling client funds and falsifying affidavits in an elder abuse case. He had changed his name slightly from Jerry Vance to Gerald Vance and moved states, slipping through the cracks of the reciprocity system. He was not a shark. He was a bottom feeder who had already been caught once. He was desperate, just like my parents. I smiled. Perfect. A dirty lawyer was easier to trap than a clean one. When I returned to the house, I entered through the front door, making sure to look groggy and disoriented, maintaining the illusion that the drugs were still in my system. Where were you? Linda demanded, looking up from the television. We were worried sick. You wandered off. I went for a walk, I stammered, rubbing my temples. My head hurts. I don't remember much. It is the altitude, Robert said quickly. You should rest. You are not well, Amelia. Maybe you are right, I whispered. I feel confused. I went upstairs to my room. I knew they would be watching. I knew they were waiting for the moment to strike. So I decided to give them the bait they were desperate for. I had a wall safe installed in my closet. It was a standard model, robust but crackable if you knew what you were doing, or if the owner was careless. I opened the safe. I placed a thick stack of documents inside. I had spent the previous night printing them. They looked official. They had gold foil seals and complex watermarks. They were titled Bearer Share Certificates, Ether Genetics, Retained Equity. According to the text on these papers, they represented 10% of the company's stock that I had supposedly kept after the sale. If real, they would be worth roughly $50 million. But they were not real. They were meaningless paper. Bearer shares had been largely outlawed for decades, and Ether Genetics was a privately held entity that did not issue physical stock certificates in this manner. But my parents were not financially sophisticated. They were grifters who believed in the movie version of wealth. I put the papers in the safe. Then, I left the safe door slightly ajar just a fraction of an inch. I left the room, leaving the door to the hallway open. I went downstairs to the kitchen and made myself a tea, waiting. It took less than 10 minutes. I watched on the iPad I had propped up against the backsplash. Julianne walked past my room. She stopped. She saw the open door. She saw the glint of metal from the closet. She slipped inside. Moments later, She came running out, clutching her phone. She didn't call me. She ran straight to the East Wing to find Robert and Linda. I switched the camera feed to the guest suite. Look! Julianne was breathless, her voice shaking with greed. I took a picture. The safe was open. Look at this. Robert squinted at the phone screen. Bearer shares. What is that? It is cash, Dad, Julianne squealed. It means whoever holds the paper owns the stock. It says $50 million, she held out. She didn't sell everything. She has $50 million in paper sitting in a metal box in her closet. $50 million, Linda whispered, her hand going to her throat. She looked like she was having a religious experience. That is generational wealth. That is an island. That is everything. We have to move fast, Robert said, pacing the room, his energy manic. If we get the conservatorship, we get control of the safe. We get control of those papers. We can cash them out before she even knows they are gone. Vance is drafting the petition now, Robert continued. He is filing it tomorrow morning. We just need to keep her drugged, keep her confused. By this time tomorrow, we will be the legal guardians of Amelia Breyer and her $50 million secret. They hugged each other, a three-way embrace of pure, unadulterated avarice. They were jumping up and down like children on Christmas morning. I took a sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and fragrant. They thought they had found the golden goose. They did not realize they had just admitted to a conspiracy to commit grand larceny and securities fraud on a high-definition audio recording. Enjoy the moment, I whispered to the screen. It is the last happy memory you will ever have. The transformation of Silver Peak Summit from a minimalist sanctuary into a hedonistic winter playground cost exactly $250,000. I signed the checks myself. I hired the most expensive event planner in Aspen, a woman named Chloe who wore headset microphones and screamed at florists. And I gave her a single instruction. I told her to make it look like old money. I wanted the kind of opulence that felt heavy, established, and undeniable. By 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve, my home was unrecognizable. The great room was dominated by 3 massive spruce trees, each one dusted with artificial snow and draped in strands of real crystals that caught the light of the fire and threw rainbows across the stone walls. A string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner, their music floating over the hum of conversation. Waiters in white tuxedos drifted through the crowd carrying silver trays of caviar blinis and glasses of Dom Perignon. It was perfect, it was beautiful, and it was the stage for my execution. I stood at the top of the floating staircase, hidden in the shadows of the landing, looking down at the pit of vipers I had invited into my home. My parents had insisted on this party. They claimed it was to introduce themselves to the community, to plant their flag in the social soil of the Rockies. But I knew the real reason. This was not a party. It was a press conference. It was a coronation. They wanted witnesses. They wanted the entire upper crust of Silver Peak to see Amelia Breyer, the fragile, unstable spinster, being cared for by her loving, capable parents. They needed the public to nod in sympathy when the conservatorship papers were filed the next morning. I took a deep breath. I was wearing a gown I had bought in Paris 3 years ago but never worn. It was midnight blue velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, elegant but severe. I had applied my makeup to look pale, highlighting the shadows under my eyes. I needed to look beautiful, but breakable. I needed to look like a woman who was slowly fading away. I descended the stairs. The moment I appeared, the noise in the room dipped, heads turned. I saw the whispers jumping from lip to lip like a contagion. That is her. I heard a woman in emerald silk murmur. The daughter. I heard she is having a breakdown. Tragic, her husband replied, sipping his scotch. With all that money, too. It just goes to show you. Wealth cannot buy sanity. I reached the bottom step. Linda was there instantly, rushing over to me with a look of staged concern. She was wearing a red sequined gown that was a little too tight and a little too bright. But she wore it with the confidence of a woman who believes she has already won the lottery. "Amelia, darling," she cooed, loud enough for the nearest circle of guests to hear. She took my arm. her grip firm and controlling. "Are you sure you feel up to this? You look so pale. We can take you back upstairs if it is too much." "I am fine, Mother," I said, pitching my voice to be soft, slightly trembling. "I just want to say Merry Christmas." Of course, she patted my hand patronizingly. "Just stay close to me. We do not want you getting overwhelmed and having another episode." She steered me into the room like a prize poodle. We moved through the crowd, and at every stop, the performance was the same. Linda would introduce me. I would offer a weak smile and a limp handshake, and then she would launch into her narrative. "We are just so happy to be here to support her," Linda told the mayor of Silver Peak, a portly man with a flushed face. "Amelia has been carrying such a heavy burden, the stress of the business. It finally cracked her. I am afraid, but Robert and I are here now. We are taking over the management of the estate. She needs rest, long-term rest." "A facility?" the mayor asked in a hushed tone. "We are looking at a lovely place in Switzerland," Linda nodded solemnly. "Very private, very secure. It is for the best." I stared at the floor, letting my shoulders slump. I was the picture of compliance. Inside, however, my heart was beating with the cold. Rhythmic precision of a predator. Every word she said was being recorded by the microphones I had embedded in the floral arrangements. Every lie was another nail in her coffin. Then I saw Julianne. She was standing near the ice sculpture, surrounded by a group of young, wealthy heirs who were hanging on her every word. My stomach turned over. She was wearing my dress. It was a silver slip dress made of liquid silk, a garment I had purchased for a charity gala in New York. It fit her perfectly, shimmering over her body like a second skin. She had raided my closet, my jewelry box, and my life. She was laughing, throwing her head back, holding a martini glass that was dangerously full. "Oh, this old thing," I heard her say, running a hand down her hip. "It is just something I threw on. My sister has terrible taste. Honestly, I had to style it properly to make it work. But once I take over the redecorating, this place is going to be unrecognizable. We are going to get rid of all this cold stone. I am thinking of velvet walls, gold accents. It needs to breathe." "You are moving in permanently then?" one of the men asked, eyeing her hungrily. "Permanently," Julianne scoffed. "Honey, I own the place, or I will. By tomorrow, my sister is, well, let us just say she is not fit to run a lemonade stand, let alone an estate like this. I am doing her a favor by taking the burden off her hands." She took a long swig of her drink. She was drunk, sloppy drunk, the kind of drunk that makes people feel invincible. I watched as a man in a sharp gray suit approached the group. He didn't look like the other guests. He wasn't looking at Julianne's body. He was looking at her eyes. It was Marcus Thorne. He had shaved his beard and was wearing glasses, looking every bit the harmless investment banker. He caught my eye across the room. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. He drifted into Julianne's orbit. "I heard you mention the estate," Marcus said smoothly, slotting himself into the conversation. "I am in asset management. It is a beautiful property. Dealing with the transfer of deeds can be a headache, though, especially with family." Julianne turned to him, her eyes lighting up at the prospect of a new audience. "Oh, we have a lawyer handling all of that. A shark. My dad found him. He says the conservatorship is a done deal. We have the medical records. We have the testimony. By noon tomorrow, I will be signing the checks." "A conservatorship," Marcus whistled low. "That is tricky. The courts usually require a lot of proof." "Not when you have the right judge," Julianne winked, stumbling slightly. "And not when the subject is practically catatonic. We have been managing her diet. She barely knows what day it is." I saw Marcus tap the side of his pocket. He was confirming the recording. She had just admitted to drugging me. It was beautiful. I felt a hand on my back. It was Robert. "Come with me," he muttered. "Mr. Vance is here. He wants to see you." He guided me toward the library, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Gerald Vance was standing by the fireplace. Looking nervous, he was a small, sweaty man with a comb-over and a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly. "Ms. Breyer," Vance said, extending a clammy hand. "Good to see you. You look rested." "She is fine," Robert said dismissively, closing the door. "She understands the situation, don't you, Amelia?" I looked at them. "I understand that you want me to sign papers." "It is just a formality," Vance said quickly, pulling a document from his briefcase. "This is a voluntary admission of incapacity. If you sign this tonight, it saves us the embarrassment of a court hearing tomorrow. It grants your parents immediate control over your medical and financial decisions. It is the dignified way to handle your decline." "And if I do not sign?" I asked. "Then we do it the hard way," Robert growled. "We go to court. We show them the text messages where you sound crazy. We bring in the neighbors. We put you on the stand and let everyone see how confused you are. And then, when we win, and we will win, we put you in a state facility instead of a private one. The choice is yours." He held out a pen. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the door. "I need a drink," I said. "My throat is dry. I will sign it after the toast." Robert hesitated, then snatched the pen back. "Fine, after the toast. Midnight. Do not try anything. Amelia, I have security at the gates. You cannot leave." "I have no intention of leaving," I said. I walked back out into the party. The atmosphere had shifted. It was approaching midnight. The guests were gathering in the great room for the Christmas toast. The champagne was flowing. The noise level was high. I found a quiet corner and waited. I watched my family. They were radiant. Linda was holding court near the Christmas tree, laughing at a joke she probably didn't understand. Robert was smoking a cigar inside the house, ash falling on my floor, looking like a baron surveying his fiefdom. Julianne was dancing on a table, literally on a coffee table, while a group of men cheered her on. They were disgusting. They were parasites who had gorged themselves on my blood until they were fat and slow. I saw a young woman standing near the bar. She had dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and was wearing a nondescript black dress. She was sipping seltzer. This was Sarah, Marcus's paralegal and our undercover asset. She was talking to Julianne, who had climbed down from the table and was now leaning heavily against the bar for support. I moved closer, pretending to admire a painting, turning my ear toward them. "You are so lucky," Sarah was saying, her voice laced with manufactured envy. "To inherit all of this, your sister must have been very smart to build it." "Smart?" Julianne spat the word out like a piece of gristle. "She is a robot, a freak. She has zero personality. She spent her whole life in a lab while I was actually living. She owes me this. I was the one who had to deal with our parents while she ran away. I deserve every penny." "But surely she will fight back," Sarah pressed. "Let her try," Julianne giggled. A dark, ugly sound. "We have the lawyer in our pocket. We have fake medical history. And frankly, even if she fights, who is going to believe her? She is the crazy spinster in the mountains. We are a loving family. We are going to bleed her dry. Put her in a home, and I'm going to spend the next 40 years spending her money. It is poetic justice, really." "That sounds thorough," Sarah said. "It is foolproof," Julianne declared, raising her glass. "To the golden child. That is me, by the way." Sarah smiled and tapped her clutch purse. Another recording was secured. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. Dong, dong. It was time. The band stopped playing. A hush fell over the room. Robert walked to the center of the room, holding a microphone. He tapped it twice, the feedback screeching slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert boomed, his voice thick with false bonhomie. "If I could have your attention, please. It is almost Christmas, a time for miracles, a time for family." He gestured to Linda, who glided to his side. "We have had a difficult year," Robert continued, putting on a solemn face. "As many of you know, our daughter Amelia has been struggling. It breaks a parent's heart to see their child in pain. but we are grateful to be here, to step in and provide the structure and love she needs. Tonight, we wanted to announce that we will be officially taking over the stewardship of the Breyer estate, ensuring that this beautiful home remains a sanctuary for Amelia's recovery. There was a ripple of polite applause. A few people looked uncomfortable, but most just clapped. They didn't care. They just wanted the free champagne. "And now," Robert said, scanning the room for me, "I would like to invite Amelia up here, just to say a few words, to thank you all for your kindness." He spotted me in the corner. He waved me over, his eyes hard and warning. He expected me to come up, mumble a thank you, and fade back into the background. He expected the broken, drugged daughter. I set my glass down on a waiter's tray. I smoothed the velvet of my dress. I began to walk toward the small stage they had set up in front of the fireplace. The room was silent. The only sound was the click of my heels on the stone floor. I walked with a steady, rhythmic cadence. I did not look at the floor. I did not look at my parents. I looked straight ahead. As I passed Marcus, he gave me a single, sharp wink. I reached the stage. Robert held out the microphone. A smug smile plastered on his face. "Here she is," he said. "Our girl." I took the microphone. My hand was steady. I turned to face the crowd. I saw the faces of the elite of Silver Peak. I saw curiosity, pity, and judgment. And then I looked at my family. Robert was standing to my right, looking arrogant. Linda was to my left, posing for a photographer. Julianne was in the front row, smirking, waiting for me to humiliate myself. They thought I was high on sedatives. They thought I was beaten. They thought the game was over. I raised the microphone to my lips. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The tension in the room began to spike. People shifted on their feet. Robert's smile began to falter. "Thank you, Father," I said. My voice was not weak. It was not trembling. It was clear, cold, and resonant. It was the voice of a CEO who had stared down billion-dollar boardrooms. "It is indeed a time for miracles," I continued, making eye contact with Gerald Vance, who was suddenly sweating profusely. "And tonight, I have prepared a very special presentation for you all, a Christmas story, if you will, about a family who came to the mountains looking for gold, but found something else entirely." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. "Robert," I said, turning to him, "you wanted to talk about my mental state. Let us look at the evidence." I pressed the button. The music stopped completely. The lights in the room dimmed, and the massive projection screen that had been set up for the countdown suddenly flickered to life. It wasn't a countdown. It was the view from the camera I had installed in the kitchen 3 days ago. The image was crystal clear. It showed Linda crushing blue pills into a mortar and pestle. The crowd gasped. I smiled. The mask was off. The play was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The image on the massive projection screen shifted. The shot of Linda crushing the sedatives faded, replaced instantly by a new clip. It was high definition, brutal in its clarity. It showed Robert sitting at my desk, hunching over a loan application. The audio, captured by the high-fidelity bugs I had planted, boomed through the surround sound speakers, drowning out the gasps of the crowd. "I have her signature right here," Robert's voice echoed, magnified and distorted, filling the great room. On the screen, the guests watched as my father, the man who had just played the role of the benevolent patriarch, carefully traced my name onto a federal document. "Once we get the line of credit, we transfer the funds to the Caymans before she wakes up." The room erupted. It wasn't just a gasp anymore. It was a collective recoil. The mayor of Silver Peak dropped his champagne flute, the glass shattering on the stone floor with a sound like a gunshot. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth with a diamond-encrusted hand, her eyes darting from the screen to the real Robert standing on the stage. "Turn it off!" Linda shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, a guttural, animalistic scream of pure panic. She lunged toward the AV console near the side of the stage, her red sequined dress flashing like a warning light. "Turn it off right now. It is a deepfake. It is a I. She is making it up." She frantically mashed the buttons on the console, but I had locked the system out remotely. The screen remained impassive, mercilessly rolling to the next clip. Now the screen showed Julianne. She was in my closet, stuffing my jewelry into her pockets. "She doesn't even wear this stuff," Julianne's recorded voice sneered. "I am going to pawn the emeralds first. That should cover the retainer for the criminal defense lawyer." "Lies!" Julianne screamed from the floor. She looked around wildly, her face a mask of terrified rage. She grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby table and hurled it at the screen. The bottle smashed against the canvas, red wine dripping down over the projected image of her own face like blood, but the video kept playing. I stood center stage, the microphone still in my hand. I did not move. I did not flinch. I watched them unravel with the cold precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "It is not artificial intelligence, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "It is simple, high-definition surveillance, and it is backed up on 3 different cloud servers. You cannot break it. You cannot delete it. And you certainly cannot lie your way out of it." I took a step forward, the velvet of my dress swallowing the stage lights. The fragile, mentally unstable daughter was gone. In her place stood the CEO, who had negotiated with sharks and won. "You invited these people here to witness my decline." I addressed the room, sweeping my gaze across the stunned guests. "You wanted witnesses for your narrative. Well, you have them. Look closely. Everyone. This is not a family reunion. This is a crime scene." "She is having an episode," Robert bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He waved his arms frantically at the guests. "Do not listen to her. She is off her medication. She is paranoid." "Security. Where is security? Get her off the stage." "Security works for me, Robert," I said calmly, "and they are not here to remove me. They are here to keep you from running." I signaled to Marcus Thorne, who was standing near the exit. He stepped forward, no longer the mild-mannered guest. He pulled a thick legal file from his jacket and walked toward the stage, handing it to me. I opened the folder. "Let us talk about why you are really here," I said, holding up a document. "You told everyone that my sister was a successful artist, that she was having a run of bad luck." I turned my gaze to Julianne, who was trembling, her hands clutching the edge of a table. "This is a federal indictment from the Southern District of New York," I read aloud, my voice ringing out. "Julianne Breyer, charged with 12 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You ran a Ponzi scheme called Golden Era. You stole $2 million from retirees. You are not a victim. Julianne, you are a predator, and you are currently violating your bail conditions by being in this state." The crowd murmured. The socialites who had been drinking with Julianne, the men who had been flirting with her, recoiled as if she were contagious. Julianne shrank back, her bravado evaporating instantly. "And you?" I turned to my parents. "You didn't come here to save me. You came here because you are broke. You sold the house in Ohio to pay her bail. You are homeless, you are destitute, and you saw me not as a daughter, but as a piggy bank to be smashed open." "That is a private family business," Linda yelled, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of fury. "You ungrateful little witch. We gave you life, we raised you." "You ignored me for 15 years, I shouted back, my composure cracking just enough to let the righteous anger bleed through. 15 years. Linda, I spent Christmas eating instant noodles while you took Julianne to Paris. I graduated alone. I built my company alone. You didn't even know the name of my business until you Googled my net worth last week." The room went dead silent. The raw truth of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "And when you finally showed up," I continued, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper, "you didn't come to apologize. You came to drug me." I pointed at the screen, where the loop of Linda crushing the pills was playing again. "You put sedatives in my soup," I said. "You gaslit me. You tried to make me believe I was losing my mind so you could lock me away in a facility and spend my money. You were going to file for a conservatorship tomorrow morning." I pulled another paper from the file. This is a mental capacity evaluation conducted yesterday by Dr. Elias Aris, the leading forensic psychiatrist in the state, I announced, holding it up for the cameras that were undoubtedly recording on everyone's phones. It certifies that I am of sound mind, superior cognitive function, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. Your narrative is dead, Robert, and so is your plan. In the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Gerald Vance, the dirty lawyer, was trying to inch his way toward the French doors leading to the terrace. He was clutching his briefcase to his chest, sweat glistening on his bald head. "Mr. Vance," I called out. He froze. The entire room turned to look at him. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "I wouldn't open that door if I were you. The alarms are silent, but they are active, and I believe the police are already at the main gate." Vance looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. He looked like a rat trapped in a bucket. Two large men in black suits, my private security, stepped out from the shadows and blocked his path. Vance slumped against the wall, defeated. "You—" Robert stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. The veins in his neck were bulging. He looked at the guests, who were staring at him with a mixture of horror and disgust. He looked at the screen, displaying his crimes. He looked at me, the daughter he had dismissed as a failure, standing above him, untouchable. The humiliation was total. He had wanted to be the king of Silver Peak Summit. Instead, he was the jester in a tragedy of his own making. "I am your father," he snarled, his voice shaking with a dangerous, volatile energy. "You owe me. Everything you have is mine. I made you." "You made nothing," I retorted. "I built this, I earned this, and tonight I am evicting you." Something in Robert snapped. The facade of the civilized gentleman shattered completely. With a roar of incoherent rage, he lunged at me. "You little bitch!" he screamed, charging up the steps of the stage, his hand raised to strike. The crowd screamed. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Before he could get within 3 feet of me, a blur of motion intercepted him. Silas, my head of security, tackled Robert with the force of a freight train. They hit the stage floor with a sickening thud. Robert groaned as his arm was twisted behind his back, his face pressed into the expensive hardwood. "Get off me!" Robert yelled, thrashing impotently. "I am the master of this house. Release me." "You are a trespasser," I said, looking down at him, "and an attempted fraudster, and an abuser." Linda let out a wail and fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands. Julianne was sobbing loudly, mascara running down her face, looking around for anyone to save her, but finding only cold shoulders and raised iPhones. I looked out at the guests. The party was over. The champagne was warm. The illusion of the perfect Breyer family was nothing but ash. "I apologize for the interruption to your evening," I said into the microphone, my voice steady again. "Please, finish your drinks. The police will be here shortly to collect the trash. I would advise you to give them your statements before you leave." I dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a loud thump that signaled the end of the show. I turned my back on my father, who was still pinned to the floor, cursing my name. I turned my back on my mother, who was weeping for her lost future. Not for her sins. I turned my back on my sister, who was realizing that the world did not owe her a living. I walked over to Marcus, who was waiting with a grim smile. "That was brutal," he whispered as I approached. "That was justice," I replied. "Did you get everything?" "Every word." Marcus tapped his pocket. "Section 8, Clause C of the residency agreement they signed, by attempting to assault you and by admitting to the fraud on tape. They have violated the terms. You can legally hold them until law enforcement arrives." "Good," I said. I looked down at the chaos one last time. The guests were frantically whispering, some already heading for the doors to avoid the police, others lingering to watch the train wreck. Amelia Breyer, the ghost, the failure, the ATM machine, was dead. In her place was the Queen of Silver Peak, and her reign had just begun in blood. "Get them out of my sight," I ordered the security team. "Take them to the garage. I do not want them staining the rug. As they dragged my father away, he looked back at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a shock that went deeper than anger. He finally saw me. He finally saw the monster he had created by ignoring me for 15 years. He saw the coldness, the calculation, the absolute lack of mercy. And for the first time in his life, Robert Breyer looked at his daughter and felt fear. The arrival of the authorities was not a chaotic scramble. It was a synchronized maneuver that I had choreographed with Sheriff Miller 3 hours prior to the party. The flashing blue and red lights that washed over the snow-covered driveway were visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the festive interior into a strobing crime scene. Sheriff Miller, a man with a jaw like a granite block and a patience for nonsense that measured at exactly 0, stepped through the main doors. He was flanked by 4 deputies and 2 state troopers. They did not look like they were here for the canapés. The guests, the cream of Silver Peak society, who had just witnessed the digital dismantling of my family on the projection screen, parted like the Red Sea. They pressed themselves against the stone walls, clutching their champagne flutes, desperate to distance themselves from the contagious stench of scandal. "Robert Breyer," Sheriff Miller announced, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. He walked straight to the stage where Silas was still pinning my father to the floor. "You can let him up now, son. We will take it from here." Silas stepped back, his expression impassive. Robert scrambled to his feet, adjusting his disheveled tuxedo. He looked at the sheriff with the desperate, wild eyes of a man who still believed his own con. "Sheriff," Robert gasped, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Thank God you are here. My daughter, she is unstable. She assaulted me. She has rigged this whole house to—" "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Miller interrupted, his tone bored. "What?" Robert blinked. "I am the victim here. I am the father. Robert Breyer, you are under arrest for second-degree forgery, attempted grand larceny, and conspiracy to administer a controlled substance." Miller recited the charges as he spun my father around. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room, a sound more satisfying than any symphony I had ever heard. "We have the physical evidence, the video confession, and the victim's testimony." "This is a mistake," Robert screamed as the cold steel bit into his wrists. "She is crazy. You cannot arrest me in my own house." "It is not your house, Bob," Miller said, tightening the cuffs. "And according to the document you signed yesterday, you waived your right to residency the moment you committed a felony on the premises. That makes this criminal trespassing too." While Robert was being secured, 2 deputies moved toward Linda. My mother was still on her knees, weeping into her hands, when she saw the uniforms approaching. She stopped crying instantly. The transformation was terrifying. Her face went from tragic to vicious in a heartbeat. "Do not touch me," she hissed, swiping at a female deputy. "I am a respectable woman. I am a mother. I was just trying to help her." "Linda Breyer," the deputy said calmly, grabbing my mother's wrist and twisting it behind her back with professional efficiency. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault and administering a noxious substance. We have a video of the soup, ma'am. The lab boys are going to love testing that residue." "It was just to help her sleep," Linda shrieked, struggling as she was hauled to her feet. Her red sequined dress, so glamorous an hour ago, now looked cheap and tawdry under the harsh emergency lights. "She is sick. She needs help, Amelia. Tell them I am your mother." I stood on the edge of the stage, my arms crossed, looking down at her. I said nothing. Then there was Julianne. My sister had tried to blend into the crowd. She had backed away toward the kitchen, hoping to slip out the service entrance, but she had forgotten that I had turned this house into a fortress. A state trooper blocked the kitchen door. He was holding a tablet. "Julianne Breyer?" he asked. "No," she stammered, her eyes darting around. I am a guest. My name is Sarah." "We ran the plates on the red convertible outside," the trooper said, unimpressed. "And facial recognition is a hell of a thing. You have an outstanding warrant from the Southern District of New York. 12 counts of wire fraud. You skipped bail. Miss Breyer, the U.S. Marshals have been looking for you for 3 weeks. He didn't wait for her to run. He grabbed her arm. Julianne didn't fight like our parents. She collapsed. Her legs gave out, and she became dead weight, sobbing hysterically. "I didn't do it," she wailed, the sound piercing and pathetic. "It was my partners I didn't know, Daddy. Do something, Mommy. Make them stop." But Daddy and Mommy were currently being marched toward the front door, their own wrists bound. As the deputies began to herd them out, the 3 of them, the unholy trinity that had defined my trauma, were brought past me. Sheriff Miller paused, letting them have their moment. He knew I needed this. Robert stopped struggling. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. The charming mask was gone. The concerned parent was gone. There was only the narcissist, stripped bare. "You are a demon," he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "We raised a demon. You are cold-blooded. Amelia, you have ice in your veins. How can you do this to your own flesh and blood, over money for a house?" "It was never about the money," I said softly. "You will rot in hell for this," Linda screamed, her voice cracking. "You ungrateful, selfish bitch. You will die alone in this ice castle, and no one will care. No one will ever love you." "I am the golden child," Julianne sobbed, looking at me with blurry, mascara-stained eyes. "I am the special one. You are just the ATM. You are nothing." I looked at them. I looked at the people who had brought me into the world, and then decided I wasn't worth the effort. I looked at the people who had sold my childhood home to pay for a criminal's freedom. I looked at the people who had tried to drug me into submission. I felt absolutely nothing. No sadness, no anger, no guilt, just a vast, clean emptiness, like the snow-covered valley outside. "You call me cold," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room so every witness could hear. "You call me unfeeling. You are right. I am cold. But I did not start that way. I learned this coldness from you. I learned it every Christmas you left me behind. I learned it every time you looked at me and saw a paycheck instead of a person. You built this machine. Do not be surprised when it works exactly as designed." Robert opened his mouth to scream again, but Sheriff Miller shoved him forward. "That is enough," Miller said. "Get them out of here." As they were dragged toward the door, Marcus Thorne stepped into their path. He held up a thick sheaf of papers. He didn't hand them to my parents. Their hands were cuffed, but he tucked the documents into Robert's tuxedo pocket and Linda's waistband with a sharp, dismissive motion. "These are permanent restraining orders," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the sharp edge of legal finality. "Effective immediately. They mandate a distance of 500 yards from Amelia Breyer, her property, and her business interests. They also include a cease and desist regarding any public statements about her mental health. If you mention her name to the press, to a neighbor, or even to a cellmate, I will sue you for defamation until you do not even own the clothes on your back. Have a nice night." The door opened. The swirling wind and snow blew into the foyer, a blast of cleansing cold air. My parents and my sister were shoved out into the storm, into the back of the waiting police cruisers. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood on the stage for a moment longer. Then, I turned to the guests. They were frozen, unsure of protocol. "Do you finish your drink after the hostess has her family arrested? Do you say goodbye?" "The party is over," I said simply. It was like a spell broke. The guests began to scramble. There were hushed whispers, the clatter of glass on tables, the rustle of coats being retrieved. They moved quickly, avoiding eye contact with me, scurrying out the door like cockroaches when the lights turned on. They would talk about this night for years. I would be the villain in some versions, the hero in others. I didn't care. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty. The caterers had packed up in record time, sensing the mood. The musicians had fled. Even Marcus had left, giving my shoulder a squeeze and promising to handle the arraignment in the morning. I was alone. I walked through the great room. It was a mess. Half-eaten caviar blinis sat on silver trays. Napkins littered the floor. The fire in the massive stone hearth was dying down to embers. I kicked off my heels. The stone floor was cool against my feet. I walked to the table where Julianne had been dancing. A bottle of vintage Cabernet was sitting there, open, breathing. I picked it up. I didn't bother with a glass. I walked to the center of the room, right beneath the crystal chandelier they had planned to sell for $50,000. I sat down on the floor, my velvet dress pooling around me like a dark blue lake. I took a long drink from the bottle. The wine was rich, complex, and tasted of victory. I looked around my fortress. It was quiet. No television blaring cartoons. No passive-aggressive comments about the decor. No smell of cigarette smoke. No fear of what was in my food. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 15 years. My shoulders dropped. The tension that had been a constant hum in the back of my neck finally unspooled. I was an orphan now, in every way that mattered, and it was the most liberating feeling in the world. I had cut the rod out. I had saved the limb. I was safe. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the warmth of the house protecting me. I was about to stand up and finally turn off the lights when my phone buzzed. It was sitting on the floor next to me. I frowned. It was 1 a.m. Marcus wouldn't call. He knew I needed space. I picked it up. The screen displayed unknown caller. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. The security settings on my phone should have blocked anonymous numbers. I swiped the screen. "This is Amelia Breyer," I said, my voice sharp. There was a pause. Then, a voice spoke. It was a male voice, low, gravelly, and utterly devoid of humanity. It sounded like rocks grinding together in a mixer. "Ms. Breyer," the voice said. It wasn't a question. "You put on quite a show tonight. We were watching the police scanner. Very dramatic." I stiffened. "Who is this?" "Names are not important," the voice rasped. "What is important is arithmetic. Simple math." "If you are a reporter, I am hanging up," I said, my thumb hovering over the end button. "I am not a reporter," the man laughed, a dry hacking sound. "I am an investor, a silent partner, you might say, in your sister's business ventures." My blood ran cold. The adrenaline that had just left my body came rushing back, but this time it was different. It wasn't the thrill of the hunt. It was the chill of the target. "Julianne is in police custody," I said, gripping the phone tight. "She has nothing. If she owes you money, you are in line behind the federal government." "We do not stand in lines, Ms. Breyer," the voice said, "and we do not deal with bankrupt girls in holding cells. Julianne borrowed a lot of money from us to keep her little pyramid scheme floating. $500,000, to be exact, plus interest. The vigorish is substantial." "That is not my problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have no legal obligation to her debts. I have a restraining order. I have cut ties." "You can cut ties with family," the man said, his voice dropping an octave. "But you cannot cut ties with debt, not our kind of debt. You see, when Julianne borrowed that money, she used collateral. She didn't have any assets, of course, so she used the next best thing. She used her future inheritance. She showed us your portfolio. She showed us this house." "That is fraud," I whispered. "She had no right." "We do not care about rights," the man interrupted. "We care about collections. Julianne is gone. She is in the system. She is useless to us. But you are sitting in a $15 million mansion. You are the one with the deep pockets. In our world, debt is genetic. If the sister cannot pay, the family pays." "I am calling the police," I said. "Go ahead," the voice challenged. "Tell Sheriff Miller that the Slavic Brotherhood says hello. He knows better than to get involved in our business. Listen to me closely. Amelia, we want our money. $500,000, plus $50,000 for the inconvenience. You have 48 hours. And if I don't pay..." "You are a smart woman," the voice said. "You secured your house against your parents. You locked the doors. You put up cameras. But a house is just glass and wood. It burns. Amelia, it burns very easily, and accidents happen on these mountain roads all the time." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise," the man said. 48 hours, or we come to collect in person, and we are not as polite as your parents." The line went dead. I sat there in the middle of my empty, silent ballroom, the bottle of wine forgotten in my hand. The feeling of relief vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of dread. I looked at the black glass of the windows. The reflection showed a woman in a velvet dress, sitting alone in a castle. But now, the castle didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a cage. I had defeated the parasites. I had won the legal battle. But I had forgotten one crucial variable. When you kill the host, the lice die. But the wolves just look for the next warm body. And the wolves were at the door. The man on the phone had promised me 48 hours. It was a lie. Of course, criminals do not honor deadlines. They exploit them. He assumed that the threat would make me panic, make me run, or make me start liquidating assets. He assumed I would be busy crying over my arrested family. He did not know that I had spent the last decade analyzing risk variables for a living. I did not put the phone down. I dropped it into a glass of water, frying the SIM card instantly. I walked to the wall-mounted console near the fireplace. The screen was dark, blending into the stone, but at my touch, it flared to life, displaying a three-dimensional schematic of the estate. The perimeter sensors were already screaming red. They were not coming in 48 hours. They are here now. I watched the thermal imaging feed from the tree line. 6 figures moving in a tactical formation. They were dressed in white camouflage, blending into the blizzard, carrying assault rifles that were definitely not legal in Colorado. They were professional, they were efficient, and they were bypassing my outer perimeter fence with terrifying ease. I tapped the screen, zooming in on the keypad at the main gate. The thermal residue showed that someone had punched in a code. Not a hack, a valid entry code. I froze. There were only 4 people who knew the master override code for the perimeter. Me, my security chief, Silas, and yesterday, under the guise of the family support agreement, I had foolishly given a secondary access code to Robert and Linda. My stomach churned with a cold, hard realization. They knew. My parents knew they were going down. Before the police arrived, before the handcuffs clicked, they must have contacted Julianne's creditors. They sold the security codes. It was their final transaction. They traded my safety for a promise of leniency, or perhaps just for a quick wire transfer to an offshore account they hoped to access later. They had literally sold the keys to the castle to a death squad. "You really are thorough, Robert," I whispered to the empty room. The 6 figures were moving up the driveway. They were avoiding the main lights, sticking to the shadows. They thought they were hunting a frightened, a lone woman in a glass house. They were wrong. They were walking into the digestive tract of a mechanical beast, and I was the brain. I swiped my hand across the console. Initiate Protocol Citadel. The house did not have an alarm. There were no sirens. The lights in the great room simply extinguished, plunging the entire main floor into pitch blackness. The electronic locks on the internal doors slammed home with a series of heavy, metallic thuds that echoed through the structure like a prison lockdown. I moved. I did not run. I glided. I knew the layout of my home in the dark. I slipped into the service corridor behind the kitchen, my breathing steady. I was not afraid. Fear is a reaction to the unknown. I knew exactly what was happening. I pulled up the feed on my smartwatch. The intruders had reached the front door. The leader punched in the code. The lock disengaged. They stepped into the foyer. I watched them on the infrared cameras. They moved with confidence, sweeping their weapons left and right. They split up. 2 went for the stairs, heading for the master bedroom. 2 stayed to guard the exit. 2 moved toward the library. I pressed a button on my watch. In the foyer, the smart glass windows, which were currently transparent, suddenly turned opaque. The ambient light from the snow outside vanished. The intruders were now in total, absolute darkness. "What the hell?" one of them shouted. "Night vision," the leader barked. I waited until they fumbled for their goggles. Then, I triggered the strobes. The emergency lighting system I had installed for ether genetics was designed to disorient corporate spies. High-intensity LED strobes, pulsing at a frequency that induces nausea and vertigo, exploded from the ceiling. The men screamed, ripping the goggles off their faces. They were blind, dizzy, and swinging their weapons wildly. "Amelia Breyer," the leader shouted, his voice cracking over the noise of the wind outside. "We know you are here. Come out and we make this quick. Make us chase you. And we burn this place down." I picked up the service intercom handset in the hallway. I routed my voice through the house-wide audio system. "You are trespassing on private property," my voice echoed from every speaker, calm and digitized. "The police have been notified. Leave now, or you will be contained." "Find her!" the leader screamed. "She is in the control room. Check the basement." They began to smash things. They were shooting at the walls, at the artwork. I heard a vase shatter. I heard bullets tearing into the drywall. I needed to hear them. I could not fight 6 armed men in a hallway. I needed them in the kill box. I unlocked the door to the East Wing hallway. The magnetic lock released with a loud clack. "Over there," one of the men shouted. "She is running for the garage." It was exactly what I wanted them to think. I started running down the service corridor that ran parallel to the East Wing. I made sure my footsteps were heavy enough to be heard. I wanted them to hear me. I wanted them to chase the rabbit. "Get her." I heard the heavy boots pounding on the floorboards. They were following the sound. They were rushing blindly toward the only exit I had left open. I reached the garage access door. I burst through it, into the cavernous 4-car garage where Julianne's unpaid-for convertible and my SUVs were parked. I sprinted across the concrete floor to the far side, where a reinforced steel panic door led to the garden. I opened the panic door and slammed it shut, but I did not go through it. I hid in the narrow maintenance closet next to the hydraulic lift controls. The 6 men burst into the garage. They saw the panic door. They saw the snow swirling in from the slightly cracked garage door I had opened remotely. "She is trying to get to a car," the leader yelled. "Block the exit." They fanned out, surrounding the vehicles. All 6 of them were now inside the garage, the concrete box. I waited for 1 heartbeat, 2. I pressed the master switch on the wall inside the closet. Wham! The heavy blast-proof fire doors that separated the garage from the house slammed down from the ceiling. They were 3 inches of solid steel, designed to stop a chemical fire from spreading to the main residence. At the same time, the main garage door, the one leading outside, began to descend. It was a high-speed, reinforced hurricane shutter. "It is a trap," the leader screamed. "Move, move." They fired at the descending shutter. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the hardened aluminum, but the motor didn't stop. The door slammed into the concrete floor and locked automatically. They turned to the fire door leading back to the house. They fired at the control panel. They kicked it. It didn't budge. They were sealed in. I stepped out of the maintenance closet. I was behind a bulletproof glass partition that separated the mechanic's bay from the parking area. They spun around, raising their weapons, but they could not touch me. I picked up the microphone on the console. "Gentlemen," I said, "welcome to Silver Peak." They rushed the glass, hammering on it with the butts of their rifles. One of them fired a burst at my face. The glass spiderwebbed slightly but held firm. It was rated to stop a .50 caliber round. "You are dead," the leader roared, his eyes bulging. "You think this glass will hold forever? We have explosives." "I am sure you do," I said, typing on the keyboard. "But you might want to look at the ventilation system." I pointed up. The garage was equipped with a halon fire suppression system. It was designed to suck the oxygen out of the room in 30 seconds to starve a fire. I didn't activate the halon that would kill them. And I wasn't a murderer, but I did activate the high-velocity exhaust fans. A roar filled the room as the fans kicked in. The temperature in the garage, already cold, began to plummet as the freezing mountain air was cycled in through the intake vents, creating a wind tunnel effect. "I have lowered the temperature to -10 degrees, I said, "and I have locked the frequency of your radio jammers. You are stuck in a concrete refrigerator." The leader glared at me. The Brotherhood will come for you. You cannot hide." "They won't come," I said, "because they are already watching." I tapped a key. A large monitor mounted on the garage wall flickered to life. It showed a live video call. The screen was split. On one side was Sheriff Miller's face, looking grim in his dispatch center. On the other side was a live feed of the garage interior, showing the 6 men trapped like rats. "Sheriff," I said into the headset, "I have 6 intruders detained in my garage. They are heavily armed. They have admitted to being affiliated with the Slavic Brotherhood, and I am streaming this feed directly to the FBI field office in Denver." The leader's face went pale. He realized instantly that this wasn't just a failed break-in. It was a mass indictment. Their faces were clear. Their weapons were visible. Their threats were recorded. "You set us up," he whispered. "You knew." "Of course I knew," I replied, looking him in the eye through the safety of the glass. "Did you really think I would arrest my sister and not expect her debts to come calling? I counted on it. I needed you to come here." I walked closer to the glass. "I needed to clean the slate," I said. "My family was infected. You have a fever. And tonight, the fever breaks." Sheriff Miller's voice came over the speakers in the garage. "This is the Sheriff's Department. Drop your weapons and lie on the ground. SWAT is 2 minutes out. If I see a single weapon in a hand when we breach that door, we will open fire." The men looked at each other. They looked at the heavy steel doors. They looked at me, standing calm and untouchable in my velvet dress. Slowly, one by one, they dropped their rifles. They knelt on the freezing concrete, hands behind their heads. The leader stared at me with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am the woman who bought the mountain," I said. 2 minutes later, the exterior garage door was blown off its hinges by a shaped charge. A team of SWAT officers in full tactical gear flooded the room, shouting commands. Flashbangs detonated, filling the garage with blinding light and smoke. I watched from my booth as the 6 men were zip-tied and dragged out into the snow. They were loaded into armored transports that had followed the sheriff's convoy. I deactivated the lockdown. The lights in the house flickered back on. I walked out of the garage and into the main driveway. The storm was finally breaking. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a world that was pure, white, and silent. Sheriff Miller walked over to me. He holstered his weapon and shook his head. "You took a hell of a risk, Amelia," he said, "using yourself as bait. If that glass had failed—" "It was ether genetics glass, Sheriff," I said. "I designed the polymer structure myself. It does not fail." "Still," Miller sighed, looking at the tire tracks in the snow. "Your parents giving up the codes? That is cold, even for criminals." "They were desperate," I said, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill. "Desperate people make predictable mistakes. I just provided the variables." "Well," Miller tipped his hat, "the FBI is going to want a statement. This bust is going to clear up a lot of racketeering cases. You probably just took down the entire western cell of that organization." "Glad I could be useful," I said. I watched the convoy of police vehicles drive away, their taillights disappearing down the mountain road. I was alone again, but this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was secure. I walked back into my house. I went to the kitchen and made myself a fresh cup of tea. I stood by the window and looked out at the vast, dark expanse of the Rockies. I had faced the past, my parents, and I had faced the consequences of that past, the debt collectors. I had dismantled them both with nothing but intellect and architecture. My phone buzzed again. I had fished it out of the water and dried it off. It was waterproof. Another detail the mobster hadn't counted on. It was a text from Marcus. "Saw the police scanner. Are you alive?" I typed a reply. "The house is clean. Trash is taken out. Come over for breakfast. I'm making waffles." I set the phone down. I was Amelia Breyer. I was 34 years old. I was an orphan. I was a target. And I was the most dangerous thing on this mountain. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had thrown the shoes out. I was barefoot, standing on solid ground. And the view from the summit was spectacular. The storm broke at dawn. The sun over Silver Peak summit did not rise gently. It exploded over the jagged ridgeline, painting the fresh 3-foot blanket of snow in blinding shades of white and gold. The world looked scrubbed clean. The pines, bowed heavy under the weight of the blizzard, stood silent and majestic against a sky of piercing, impossible blue. I stood on the terrace wrapped in a cashmere blanket, drinking black coffee. The driveway had already been plowed by my private contractors. The tire tracks from the police cruisers were gone, erased by the wind during the night. The shattered glass in the garage had been swept away. The house was pristine again, a gleaming diamond on the mountaintop, showing no scars from the violence of the night before. I felt lighter. It was a physical sensation, as if gravity had released its hold on my bones. For 34 years, I had carried a phantom weight, the crushing expectation of parents who did not love me, the shadow of a sister who despised me, and the desperate, pathetic hope that one day I would be enough. That weight was gone. It had been handcuffed and dragged away in the back of a squad car. I dressed in a suit of sharp charcoal wool. I did not dress for comfort. I dressed for business. I had one final transaction to close. I drove my SUV down the winding mountain road, the chains on my tires biting into the packed snow with a rhythmic crunch. The drive to the county detention center took 45 minutes. I spent the time listening to a podcast on global economics. I did not think about the people I was going to see. I thought about interest rates. I thought about the future. The detention center was a squat, ugly building made of gray cinder block and misery. It smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. I bypassed the visitor waiting area. My lawyer, Marcus Thorne, had arranged for a private consultation room. Money, I had learned, could buy privacy even in purgatory. They brought them in one by one. Robert was first. He looked 20 years older than he had the night before. His tuxedo was gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He was unshaven, and his eyes were bloodshot. He sat down across from me at the metal table, the chains on his wrists clinking against the surface. He did not yell. He did not bluster. He looked at me with the dazed expression of a man who had woken up in a nightmare. "Amelia," he croaked. His voice was rough. "You have to get me a lawyer, the public defender. He says I am looking at 10 years. 10 years. Amelia, I will die here." "You probably will," I said, placing a leather folder on the table. "Second-degree forgery, conspiracy, attempted assault, and with the evidence I gave the FBI regarding your involvement with the Slavic Brotherhood. They might add racketeering to the list. You are radioactive. Robert." "I am your father," he whispered, playing his last card. It was a card that had already been played, torn up, and burned. "That is what we are here to discuss," I said. I opened the folder. "I have a proposal, a final settlement." Robert's eyes flickered with a spark of greed. It was reflexive, hardwired into his DNA. "Will you drop the charges?" "I cannot drop the charges," I said. "The state is prosecuting you. The video evidence is public record now. You are going to prison. That is unavoidable. But what happens after? That is up for negotiation." I slid a document toward him. "You and Linda are bankrupt," I explained calmly. "You sold the Ohio house. You have no assets. When you go to prison, the creditors will pick your bones clean. You will have no commissary money. You will have no protection. And if you ever get out, you will be destitute on the street." Robert stared at the paper. "What is this?" "I am offering to buy your debts," I said. "I will pay off the remainder of the loan you took out on the Ohio house. I will settle the outstanding balances on your credit cards. I will deposit $5,000 a year into your commissary accounts while you are incarcerated. It is enough to keep you comfortable. Toothpaste, snacks, phone calls." "And in return?" he asked suspiciously. "In return," I said, pointing to the signature line, "you sign this. It is a legal termination of parental rights. It is a formal, notarized document stating that you voluntarily sever all legal, biological, and familial ties with Amelia Breyer. You renounce any claim to my estate, my future earnings, and my name. You acknowledge that from this moment forward, we are strangers." Robert looked up at me. "You want to divorce us?" "I want to erase you." I corrected him. "I want it on paper. I want to know that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you will not get a single dime of my fortune. I want to know that I am legally, officially, an orphan." He hesitated. His pride was battling his survival instinct. But Robert was a survivor. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. "There is one more thing," I said as he finished. "Just a small detail. I thought you should know." "What?" he mumbled, staring at the table. "I bought Vanguard Logistics this morning," I said casually. Robert's head snapped up. Vanguard was the shipping company where he had worked as a regional manager for 30 years. It was his identity. He had built his entire sense of self-worth around his position there, even after he retired. You bought Vanguard." "A controlling stake." I nodded. "My first act as majority shareholder was to audit the pension fund. It turns out there were some irregularities in your department back in the 90s. Nothing criminal, just sloppy. I have retroactively terminated your contract for cause. You lose the company pension, Robert. But don't worry, the commissary money I just promised you will cover the difference." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I had not just put him in jail. I had dismantled his past. I had erased his legacy. "Goodbye, Mr. Breyer," I said. Linda was next. She cried the entire time. She tried to reach for my hand. I pulled it back. She signed the papers because she had no choice. She was a woman who had never worked a day in her life, and the prospect of being poor terrified her more than the prospect of losing a daughter she never wanted. Then came Julianne. My sister walked in. She was not crying. She looked hollow. The arrogance, the fire, the golden child entitlement, it had all been extinguished. She looked at me with dull, dead eyes. "The FBI was here," she said flatly. "They asked about the investors. They asked about the Ponzi scheme." "I know," I said. "I sent them." "They said I am looking at 15 years, she said. 15 years. Amelia, I will be 50 when I get out. My life is over." "Your life as a parasite is over," I said. "You might actually have to learn a trade there. I hear the library program is quite good." I slid the paper toward her. "Sign it, renounce the family claim, and I will pay off the $50,000 inconvenience fee to the Brotherhood so they don't put a hit out on you in the cell block. I am buying your life. Julianne, consider it the last gift you will ever receive." She looked at the paper. She looked at me. For a second, I saw a flash of the old Julianne, the one who used to mock my clothes and steal my diary. "You won," she whispered bitterly. "Are you happy?" "Happiness is a fluctuating chemical state," I said, taking the pen back after she signed. "I prefer security. And yes, Julianne, I am very secure." I stood up. I gathered the documents, the signed confessions of my freedom. I did not look back. I knocked on the metal door for the guard. Walking out of the detention center was a sensory experience I would never forget. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. I stepped out into the parking lot. The air hit me first. It was cold, crisp, and incredibly clean. It tasted like snow and pine needles. It tasted like oxygen that I didn't have to fight for. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until my chest ached. I looked up at the sky. It was vast and open. There were no clouds. I got into my car and drove. I didn't play a podcast this time. I rolled the windows down, despite the freezing temperature, and let the wind whip through my hair. I drove up the mountain, climbing higher and higher, leaving the valley, the jail, and the past far below in the shadows. When I arrived back at Silver Peak Summit, the sun was at its zenith. The house was bathed in light. I walked inside. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful. It was a heavy, luxurious silence that belonged only to me. I went to the great room. The Christmas tree was still standing, tall and magnificent, its crystals shimmering in the daylight. I had not taken it down. I sat on the white rug in front of the fireplace. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box. It was a gift I had ordered for myself months ago, back when I thought I would be spending Christmas hiding from the world. It arrived this morning. I opened the box. Inside was a watch. It was a Patek Philippe, vintage, with a moon phase complication. It was a masterpiece of engineering. On the back, I had engraved a single word, mine. I strapped it onto my wrist. It felt heavy, substantial. It was a reminder that my time was my own now. I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't waiting for approval. I was on my own time. The doorbell rang. I didn't flinch. I checked the camera. It was Marcus. I opened the door. He was holding a bottle of vintage champagne and a box of donuts from the local bakery. "Classy combination," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I figured we needed to balance out the victory," Marcus grinned, shaking the snow off his coat. "How did it go?" "It is done," I said. "They signed everything. The legal severance is complete. I am officially a free agent." Marcus popped the cork on the champagne. It made a sharp, festive sound that echoed through the foyer. He poured 2 glasses and handed me one. We walked into the great room and stood before the massive window, looking out over the white expanse of the Rockies. The world stretched out before us, endless and bright. "To the golden child," Marcus said, raising his glass with a wry smile. "The real one." I clinked my glass against his. "To the survivor," I corrected him. We drank. The champagne was cold and sharp. "So," Marcus said, leaning against the glass, "what now? You have the house, you have the money, you have the freedom. What does Amelia Breyer do next?" I looked at the view. I saw the peaks of the mountains, sharp and dangerous and beautiful. I saw the path I had carved to get here. I saw the future unrolling like a blank canvas. "I think," I said slowly, "I am going to buy a ski resort, or maybe start a new company. Or maybe I will just sit here for a month and watch the snow fall. I can do whatever I want. Marcus, that is the point." I turned back to the room. I looked at the spot on the floor where my father had been arrested. I looked at the table where my sister had danced. The ghosts were gone. I had exorcised them not with holy water, but with contracts and courage. I walked over to the Christmas tree. I reached out and touched a crystal ornament. It was cold and hard, just like the lesson I had learned. I wasn't lonely. I realize that now. The hollow feeling in my chest that I had carried for 15 years hadn't been loneliness. It had been the absence of self. I had given so much of myself to them, trying to fill their bottomless need, that I had nearly disappeared. But I was back. I was whole. I was fortified. I smiled, and this time, it was a genuine smile. It reached my eyes. It warmed the room. They had tried to use me as a foundation to prop up their crumbling lives. They didn't realize that when you pour concrete over a flower, it dies. But when you pour concrete over steel, you build a skyscraper. I took a sip of champagne and whispered the truth to the silent, beautiful room. They wanted to break me to fix their mistakes. Instead, I broke them to fix my future. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride of betrayal, justice, and ultimate revenge, and I hope you enjoyed every twist and turn as much as I enjoyed writing it. I am dying to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a snowy mountain cabin like Amelia, or somewhere sunny and warm? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Amelia's final decision. And if you want more stories where the underdog bites back and justice is served ice cold, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Family Revenge Stories, smash that like button, and if you really loved it, hit the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Your support means the world and helps us bring more of these dramas to life. Until next time, stay safe and stay sharp.